Hello, everybody. Super excited to be here. I see some familiar names. I'm Jack Bischoff. I'm the GM of the TBM Council, and we are having a treat today because we're going to talk with an AI disruptor. And I know that many of us are struggling today with just the fundamentals, right, of investigating and exploiting AI in our daily roles and across our organizations. But we're going to get an opportunity to learn a little bit about not just what they do, but how they did it. And so with us today, we've brought in Louise Baldwin, who's a co-founder of Archways AI, and they are an ecosystem member. And she's agreed to come in and, not only have we actually crafted with her a bit of a special offer for TBM Council members, which we'll talk about very, very briefly, but she's agreed to come share a little bit of insight into their secret sauce in their journey as they went through doing what they did. So, Louise, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Jack. Great to join the session.
For the sake of time, let's just jump right in. We have very little time and lots to talk about. So right now, everybody is always saying AI, AI, AI. It's going to transform the way IT decisions are made, right? But when I look around and I meet an awful lot of organizations worldwide, a lot of teams are drowning still in spreadsheets and email chains and PowerPoints. And even if they're using AI to help consolidate and summarize and generate some of those, but what does that actually tell you about where an awful lot of organizations are really at today?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, no matter what advancements we talk about in AI, the reality is that spreadsheets and emails just remain so prevalent. And what we see is that a lot of enterprises have adopted AI at individual levels. So people are experimenting, co-pilots are common, but like you said, decision making is still relying on old tools. A lot of AI hasn't really been institutionalized. And there's a framework that I really like from A16Z that kind of describes it from a structural shift perspective. So I'll just bring up that framework to kind of add some structure around it.
16 Ounce is a great newsletter from a PE organization, a VC organization that I know Luis, both and I like a lot.
Yeah, always topical, always interesting insights. And Jack, when we look at it and break it down, right, there's these 6 sort of core factors. So take the first one around thinking through coordination. So at the individual level, what we see is often in enterprise, people have their own prompts, their own outputs, but a lot of that's still sitting in personal workflows. So it's about moving from there into more structured, real decision checkpoints that go with it. On Signal, I think we all know there's never been more information, right? It's never been easier to produce decks, analysis, but with it comes a lot of noise. So it's really about that signal extraction within enterprises to make it more auditable. With bias, we find a lot of general models tend to reinforce the user. They tend to agree. And institutional AI really needs to challenge those assumptions, right? Call out the inconsistencies. Broad tools are often very powerful, but when we look at it again in an enterprise context and with our own angle, of course, of software decisions, it's really like taking in that domain context. So the contracts, overlap, exposure, all of this enterprise data that needs to play in to make those decisions stick. On outcomes, often a lot of the focus initially we see is on time saving, which is of course important, right? That's productivity, but at the end of the day, boards care about financial leverage and risk discipline as part of that too. And on enablement, we find that, tools are often available, but the question is the process actually encoded so that it sticks over time, right? So that it's caught up in the actual processes that we know are so critical in enterprises to actually getting the job done, right? It has to align with internal process. So the way we think about it from really institutionalizing AI, it's really adding more structured decision architecture around decisions. That's when we think that AI really starts to take off in an enterprise context.
It's easy to say, it's hard to do, right? But I don't know, an example of that is software evaluation, purchases, renewals, portfolio optimization, that kind of thing. These efforts are a great example because when you think about it, I've been involved in so many of these, and they've always been a pressure cooker. There's lots of time constraint, right? Lots of teams working in spreadsheets, And so it's not new. It's been going around for this way for a long time. But what is causing this decision cycle to kind of fail now? It's becoming less effective, right? What's changed that makes AI and the impact it brings so meaningfully different?
Yeah, the mess hasn't changed really, but it's more the importance of the decisions being made around them. So I think, everyone will see that software is really now shaping core competitive capability, right? Across organizations, from customer experience to speed of execution to how teams work day to day. And we're seeing that increasingly so with agentic AI, because the reality is software is taking on more operational responsibility in terms of the work that the software is actually doing. And at the same time, organizations are being hit by the fact that the market is moving faster than internal processes, right? So the vendors are shipping constantly, categories are becoming blurry. Like most organizations really actually struggle to get a clear sense of what they actually own today, never mind, how that's changing with what's happening in the market. And then the other aspect, of course, is just the economic reality of it, that software is one of the most largest, but also most controllable spend line items in enterprises, right? Multi-year commitments that have real financial consequences. And so, the pressure cooker has kind of always been there, the data mess has been there, but it feels like the stakes are higher than ever based on what's happening in the market.
Yeah, I know a couple of organizations that have had some very big renewal surprises that they were not prepared to. They just completely forgot they were coming, right? So I totally get that. Um,
I
but
know, Jack,
real
on
quick,
that, I think that piece though, of what you're mentioning around those surprises, like it really hits because of the siloed nature. The fact that information is being stored in silos and it's hard to get that centralized visibility. So you kind of have these like last minute surprises that crop up. And we kind of went through this mapping process, right? Of like, what does that look like from a structural perspective today of where the split is? And so we kind of broke it down into these three like pillars within software decisions. So on the one hand, you have like the systems of record, and often those where the contracts sit, where the inventories, lives at the end of the day. But in a separate silo, you have the vendor evaluation happening, right? So often those evaluation decisions that should be tied into what you're describing, right? Like that actual renewal contract information, but often sitting completely separately. And then on the other side, we have like the market insight that's often coming from static reports, benchmarks, consultants, and each part of these are working independently. And that's what we find like a lot of the failure really happening is just the fact that there is no structured decision intelligence bringing this together. So decisions are happening in silos, which makes it just really hard to make sort of meaningful, holistic decisions as a result.
not to mention, takes a long time.
It
I've seen
does.
some
It
big,
does.
big, big documents recently. But let's real quick, if we could. I want
Yeah.
to jump backward in time for a second, back to when you guys first started, because this is where it resonates with a lot of people who are trying to get started, right? As you began assessing the landscape for opportunity, like you're looking around, and what were some of the indicators of things that might make sense as great use cases, things that would result in better outcomes? Like what did you even begin to look at, right? Like how did you identify?
Yeah. In my case as a founder, it didn't really begin with a framework at the start. It really began with personal frustration. So in a prior life, I was a solutions lead at an enterprise data company, and our CEO, who was a great former CIO, wasn't a big fan of Gartner. And what I quickly learned is that if you don't engage them, they generally don't engage you, right? So yeah, it's largely pay to play. And I helped lead that process of getting us into the Maverick quadrant. But it's a box exercise, capabilities being reduced to static categories, nuance sort of flattened. And I just walked away from it thinking like, surely this isn't how thoughtful software decisions should work, right? The idea that there is one best vendor sitting in a static report, like regardless of your architecture, your own budget, your risk tolerance, your functional needs, it just didn't make sense to me. And that was where it started, was really feeling the pain. But again, thinking about it from a more like scaled perspective, it then becomes, well, look, is this just messy or is it structurally broken? And so you then go through that process, right, as a founder, of thinking through, is this a problem worth solving? And, really from that perspective, it was breaking it down more structurally. So 3 elements really in sort of my own thinking around it was, does it carry economic weight? We said it before, but software is one of the largest controllable spend items, right? No one knows that better than TBM practitioners, right? Every renewal, every evaluation is a multi-year financial commitment. Enterprises are spending hundreds of millions on software, and making changes in decision has real impact. Happening all the time. Evaluations are happening all the time. So the portfolio is like living and breathing. And then the third aspect of it, and I think this was really where the sort of opportunity with AI came in, was that, the intelligence wasn't being institutionalized. So assumptions weren't being stress tested, criteria wasn't persistent. And that really fit what we were seeing in terms of the opportunity that AI is introducing, really for structural change around how decisions are being made. And it was kind of a combination of the two, right? One, just firmly believing in kind of the value proposition, and then really then applying and thinking at a structural level of changes really being made.
God, yeah, and I love your point about the software spend being such a critical piece of this, because after labor, and I'm sure a lot of you and really fast. That whole but just an evaluation that's used for purchase or renewals, like how does that work out?
Yeah, I think anyone on the call who's gone through a major RFP or chosen a large enterprise system knows how sort of painful evaluations can be, right? So that process of looking at evaluations of how long it can take in enterprises, best case sometimes 6+ months, but it can go on for years. Workshops, requirement lists that grow across stakeholder groups. And so evaluation became sort of a clear starting point for adding structure around decision making and really sort of speeding up the process. I think one of the things we learned really from working with our customers is that it isn't just the vendor comparison piece in the market. It's the internal alignment around what the requirements should be, and that coordination piece is where a lot of value actually is to be found, right? So a lot of decisions happening in silos, sort of lack of structure around needs. And it's kind of the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you can't help align on what your needs are in the first place, you're going to be brought off into all sorts of directions by vendors in the market. And so that became a huge area really to add value and transparency and ensure that not only were decisions like faster, but there was just more structure around the decisions being made.
You trigger me when you said that, great segue you offered me about data, garbage in, garbage out. The dirty little secret of AI, right? Is I mean, people don't have great ITAM and SAM, and often there are some great TBM practitioners, but often there are some that are just starting and their data is a mess. Their contracts, they may not even have contract systems. How did you actually address that enterprise software data mess? Like it can be all over the place.
Yeah, it's always the uncomfortable reality, right, of working at enterprise scale. And when we started, in this space, it was exactly what you'd expect. We saw ServiceNow instances that didn't reconcile at all with the live portfolio or actual spend, renewal dates and spreadsheets that didn't match contracts. But that sort of fragmented nature is what we came in with our eyes open on, really. I previously worked as solutions lead at Tamer, where we were reconciling enterprise data, so reconciling entities and sort of the traceability and normalization of data. And so we came in with the expectation that we weren't going to get a clean data set. And this is a point that I often hear from TBMC leadership, right? Is don't wait for perfect data to get started. And that is the principle that we followed with. It's about structuring what exists and then being explicit about uncertainty and ensuring traceability. So it's not ignoring the fact that, the data is a mess. You have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge the data quality, but then starting with what you have. We also had a great opportunity to enrich. I think that's the thing of what we do, right, in terms of bringing in the market intelligence piece and adding external data sets, is that we are enriching the underlying data. So often that cleanup of taking, portfolio data where the names were misentered regarding the products, etc., and taking in that additional enrichment to give sort of visibility. So we treat messy data as a starting condition, but not an obstacle.
So you were ready for structured and unstructured data and just lists of things, and like you find often in an ITAM solution or a CMDB or a software list or a portfolio tool. Interesting. Okay. I wonder if we could skip and just for the sake of time, can make this a little bit real. Can you kind of step us through Archways and kind of give us a view? I know we've been talking about it for a while, and so maybe give us a view of what this thing really is all about.
Yeah, sounds great. So let me share my screen again, and we can actually jump into Archways and show you kind of how we bring this to life in product. Okay, there we go. Jack, you can let me know, is my screen showing?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so really within the product, what we have structured software decision intelligence around is really kind of like 3 core decisions. So how to evaluate software, what we're discussing with regards to changing that RFP process of evaluating new vendors, how to approach renewal decisions with more leverage, and then how to identify overlap and consolidation opportunities within the portfolio. So evaluation is where many teams begin. And really evaluation is about that process of structuring requirements, comparing vendors against more explicit criteria, and really helping to land on a more defensible decision. So we talked about the requirements piece, so maybe to deep dive on that element within it. So we're making it easier for teams to align on those requirements up front, to map them based on actual needs and track. So within that, what we do as well is provide a smart library where we are suggesting requirements based on the specific context of the organization to make it more dynamic and ensure that it's aligned with the reality that teams are going through. So really streamlining it, adding visibility, and making it easier to align requirements. Once we've aligned on the requirements, we dynamically match those against vendors in the market. So we're gathering data at scale on over 175,000 software vendors with independent coverage. So it's about taking both public and private data sets to really get a holistic view of the vendor's offering. Now, let's say, we're looking at a cloud security posture management example, but let's say we wanted to add another vendor to the evaluation. So I'll add, let me look up Sentinel. Sentinel-1 as an example of a vendor that we might want to add in. So we make it easy for any vendor basically to be added to the evaluation in the interest of knowing that teams are going to hear about vendors from all sorts of places, right? It could be a vendor you used before. It could be a recommendation from a colleague. And basically what we want to do is make it easy to add any vendor you want as part of the analysis. As we feed it in, we will then automatically update and run those requirements. So you'll see those numbers update as we're running live hundreds of requirements against the vendor and adding it as part of the analysis. Another key thing we see with evaluations, of course, is that scoring is really important. So often a lot of teams doing scoring in spreadsheets, bringing in colleagues from different parts of the organization, right? It could be IT, procurement, business owners. So adding that transparency in scoring, really again to add traceability and make it much, much faster to land on the right vendor. So the good thing about evaluations is that it's an easier place to get started. There's no setup requirement. For TBM Council members, we provide that domain-specific accelerators. So honing in on ITFM, technology and planning, FinOps, for those that are actively evaluating vendors in the space today. So that's a little bit of the evaluation offering, but maybe to also show the renewals piece. So as we know, evaluations are often happening because of those changes being made in the existing portfolio.
So what?
So renewals being key, right? That context around whether to renew, replace, or renegotiate with your existing vendors. So as we dig in, right? So with Archways, Jack, you kind of mentioned this in terms of data sources, right? So we will integrate with CMDB, SAM, procurement systems, so that we're taking contract data, inventory signals as part of that decision workflow. So ingesting contracts and extracting those key terms, really helping to surface the most critical dates. So if we go into maybe an example here to show you, so not every renewal deserves attention, right? Part of what we do is help teams prioritize the contracts with the most financial cost, risk, and strategic importance within it, and then honing in on the decision so that it's tracked. With this, it's really about looking at the actual timelines that teams are managing to, so turning it into trigger notifications and checkpoints, and then ensuring that the renewal doesn't reset to zero, right? So you're capturing that decision logic and sequencing and making sure that things aren't missed within the portfolio. And then the third one, Jack, will touch on rationalization maybe as the final piece for the session. But just to talk about rationalization, we're really looking at identifying capability overlap and consolidation opportunities within the portfolio. So organizations don't intentionally gain sprawling stacks, but it just happens automatically, right? M&A activity, decisions being made in isolation, different regions might be buying the same tool, and the portfolio itself isn't static. So vendors themselves are changing, even if the organization doesn't make any changes themselves. And so in the platform, what we're doing is building dynamic capability mapping across the portfolio. So here, sort of traditional rationalization often relies on static classifications, often in enterprise architecture tools. But instead of relying on a single fixed taxonomy, we're mapping vendors based on the underlying capabilities. We're then clustering them and then mapping them against internal taxonomies at the same time. So if we go into an example, teams can really, drill down on specific examples, look at the level of overlap, look at capability comparison to understand the trade-offs within it. And so teams can run scenario analysis around rationalization. And the rationalization piece, I think, is really about value and portfolio clarity. So for organizations that are under some budget pressure, looking to make cost savings, and reduce the sprawl from vendors, often it's one of the fastest time to value is within the rationalization piece. So those are kind of like, cool. the three layers, yeah.
So, there are a lot of AI options out there these days. I love this one because you take unstructured and unstructured data and you enrich it, and you automate the requirements gathering process, and you automate the matching process, and allow scoring and alignment to corporate policy and all that kind of stuff that often is completely manual. But when we think about organizations that are doing pilots without a lot of proven impact yet, because you mentioned a number of times value areas in the platform that are extremely valuable for customers. How can organizations identify use cases and understand software vendors that are kind of worth pursuing?
Yeah.
Right? Like how does that play out through this platform, or even if they're looking internally, how does that play out?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is helping teams align on clear hypothesis around the value that they're looking to drive. So, AI broadly is great, It's a lot of fun exploring different use cases, but often sometimes it can be entered in pure experimentation mode without sort of clear hypothesis on what the value is that's being looked to achieve. And so, the first question we'd always ask is, what is the economic lever, right? How is the impact connecting to revenue, cost, and risk? Like, what exactly are we measuring? Now, not everyone loves quantification, and there can be some false precision in it, but forcing assumptions up front is so, so important, because otherwise, pilots drift. It becomes interesting, but not strategically important. And so having that forcing mechanism around value, we think is really, really important. In our own case, I can kind of show you how we break that down into different levers. Now, it depends on the specific use case at hand. You really kind of have to apply that lens of internally what processes are going to change. But we'll normally map it out across 6 levers and then hone in based on organizational priorities. What are the 2 or 3 levers that we really want to focus on?
Yeah, those are really important for everybody, regardless of the kind of AI that they're looking at getting engaged in. Yeah, for sure.
It has to be. Yeah, it has to be. I think on both sides, right? I think it's just so easy to waste time on use cases that end up not really having impact unless it's brought back to kind of a value lens.
And I know, we're just about at time. So I will say, if you are somebody in the audience that's looking at making a selection on a tool to enable TBM or FinOps or a connected area, we have a special offering for you in the TBM Council in our website, based on the Archways AI platform for software intelligence. And in fact, I think you've got a slide, don't you? Yeah. If you go, you can do a TBM selection. You can go beyond and look at your whole stack. It's up to you, but we welcome the opportunity. I think this is one of the most innovative app platforms that I've come across in a long time, and I know we've got a number of board members in the community that are taking a hard look and joining the club after some serious kick in the tires. So I appreciate you coming out, Luis, today and sharing your insight and your journey and a bit about the forum. And we can open it up for questions in the last couple of minutes here. I saw good day from the San Francisco Bay Area suddenly when I looked at the chat just now. Randy Winstead. I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. Louise, thank you for walking through that, although it was a little quick for me. I'm curious, when you were incorporating new vendors into your search or into the comparison, are there some standard data sets that they provide, or are you just using AI to consolidate all the information that can be found about that vendor and then compare it to your Moscow list or what have you?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Randy, and I apologize for the speed as well. We were just talking with Jack before about my quick pace, but just to say that how we consolidate vendors, what we do is consolidate multiple lists of vendors. So we buy private data sets on the vendors, looking across multiple sort of sources of indexes across the market. So our goal is really to make sure that you're able to research any vendor. Now, in cases of niche vendors, vendors that have kind of stopped being as market relevant, what happens is if there's a niche vendor that needs to be covered through the platform, we will automatically index it. So if there's a vendor you want to look up that isn't covered in the 175,000 vendors we cover, what we do essentially is run indexing. So we basically run it through all of the research databases that we purchase to gather as much information as possible. And then to your point on kind of using AI, it's harnessing both public and private data sources. We find that often vendor documentation, their technical documentation is often good for feature checks, but with regards to, sentiment analysis, vendor health, financial health, there we really rely more on data sets purchased to get a thorough sense of the vendors.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Randy.
All right. If that was the only one that we've got, that was perfect timing. Unless you have a burning question you'd like to ask now before we sign out. Anybody else? Outstanding. Thank you very much. And I greatly appreciate your time today. I hope it was helpful. If you want to reach out and ask additional questions or would like some insight, by all means, go ahead and do so. We're always available for you. And there will be a recording, yes. Thanks, Kevin. You guys have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
And the rest
Bye
of
now.
the week. Bye-bye.